to share. Now we know that the recording is in progress. I've asked everyone to share just a little bit about their creative process with you all. And I'm just wondering if we can go around the Zoom room and share either an image or something in your workspace or something that really inspires you and helps move you forward in your writing. And let's start with Lucas. Would you be willing to kick us off?
Yeah, I can go first. First off, thanks for having us, Haley. I really appreciate it. So, in thinking about what to share, there's kind of two things I can do. I can show something that's in an actual written word processor document, and I can give you a little preview into my physical space. So, the first thing I'll do is I'll share my screen. So this document is an example of something I do with every play I start working on, even before I finish a draft of the play. I find it super helpful to, as early on as possible, just like begin to implicate other people in your process and imagine that you will share your work with someone else. Otherwise, I find I won't ever make the thing. So this document is really just a culling of like every piece of creative media, intellectual media that I'm engaging with. That feels like it's pulling around toward one play project with the intention that I eventually show it to a collaborator. So this would eventually be passed along to a director or a dramaturg. More often than not, designers I find are the people who respond to this most. But yeah, like this is for a play I wrote called 404 Not Found. And as you can see, it's just a listing of the music I'm listening to, the books I'm reading, the plays I'm reading, the articles, theory, essay I'm engaging with, theater I'm really moved by, theater that's charging the work, movies, television, yeah. And then I have a couple links from a specific workshop here. So this is something I start to do with all of my plays. I've been doing this since I've started writing plays. And then the other thing I can do, the funny thing about being on Zoom that will immediately dissolve a wall of formality is this kind of invasive breach into my personal space. So I'm going to pick up my computer and move it. Apologies if my internet is a little crappy this evening. But I'm sitting right now in my apartment in Minneapolis, and if I turn around, you kind of get to look at like my hectic sprawl swarm of paper and mementos. If I move over here, you can see on a wall, I probably have like a much more like, it doesn't look this way, but it looks a lot more organized to me than that mess. But like this is, okay, a play. This is a play. I'm building a timeline. I'm posting images that have to do with the play. There are essays that I'm reading. They're like tenets. This is like a collaborative document from Kirkland, from the Rude Max that I like to read. Whereas like over here, I have a giant whiteboard that I've carried around across the country with me as I've moved from several different spaces that really have like more to-do lists and how I'm like trying to think of time, I have to separate my work time. And then this is the thing that's probably the most impactful, my corkboard, because the things that exist here are a little more sentimental. It's more letters from family, notes, old show posters, something I keep right in front of me, which I think everyone should do. I don't remember who taught me this practice, but I have this list of it says, remember to cite your creative and intellectual legacy, where I just write down all of the writers and artists who I feel like have built the foundation for my making. And that's really harrowing to look at sometimes, where you're like, what am I doing in this mix of a pandemic? But knowing that those people kind of charge through their own moments of desperation is also really helpful. Yeah, I think that's what I got. Is that good, Haley? Is that what you want?
That was amazing. That was amazing. I feel like I just took a little glimpse into your brain, and I'm feeling inspired. I feel like I need to get some more whiteboards and corkboards for my space. um,
Oh, yeah, yes. Walls are really good. Yeah, cool.
I'm gonna maybe pass it over to Mona. Would you share something about your process and where you're at?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm actually not at my own home right now. So, me sharing this room is not going to illuminate anything, except the room of a 20-year-old young man who's away at college. But Um, I have an image that I wanted to show, and I have a poem that I would like to read. Partly because truth is, I don't know what inspires me right now. It's been really hard. Um, I've been like, we have a question. Okay. Um, yeah, I feel like I'm missing places like the Playwright Center, like the Lark, like New Dramatists. I live in New York, and um, you know, I think I know we'll get to this later, but the thing that gets me going often is just feeling the pressure of knowing I've made a commitment to other people to share something, literally. So, but I loved what you just showed, Lucas, and I will show you guys just a couple things here. Let's see, share screen, and here we go. So, this is just an image, but this is so I'm half Lebanese. Um, uh, I don't think there's been a time in my life that it hasn't been like shaky going there, and uh, one thing or another kind of thing. But the explosion that happened in 2020 was sort of beyond. Sorry, it's very windy where I am. I have to close the window, you guys. This is live theater. Hold on one moment.
Yeah.
Okay. So, um, what I like about that image, which is pretty horrific, is just the stories that just that image tells me. So if people don't know this, there was a no one really knows why, but there was this massive explosion in a port of Beirut um, in the midst of the pandemic, which we're still in. But in 2020, um, Lebanon prior to that had been doing okay in regard to lockdown, and then this was just like uh, it just threw the whole country into more of a shit show. But so as a writer, what I look at is just like this man is there's so much in the way that he's seated that he's even like using the arm of this chair, which I find interesting. The fact that he's sitting in the chair is interesting, that all around him are all these things, and just this sort of, I don't even know if words can describe it, but I suppose there's something in that image that for me is uh, maybe some kind of a weird mm, cellular form of the kind of writing I often try to do, which is people in these sort of fucked up situations and then they're just managing somehow, or there's like the juxtaposition of something that might be traumatic or insane next to this thing that's a sort of very banal. So there's something in that image, and I save a lot of those on my desktop and just, you know, browse through them every so often. The other thing I want to share is share a screen. So I had a show that was about to go up during in 2020, and we had 3 technical rehearsals under our belt, and then everything stopped. And I'm sure everybody here had experienced something like that. But there was so much grief. There was so much, all the things I could say that you guys already know. I could almost not handle like reading even a play or practically an essay. And so poetry, it was like I can read a poem. And the other piece of it is that the cast, my cast of this play, some of whom have been in and around this particular, it's a trilogy, and some of them have been involved with it for 10 years. We just got together and we would read poems, and they're just a really beautiful group of people. And so, like that photo, there's ways in which this poem speaks to me about how I want my writing to feel. So I'll just read it. I can't say that it's uplifting, but it's very beautiful. I hope you guys will indulge me. It's called My Mother's Body by Marie Howe. Bless my mother's body, the first song of her beating heart and her breathing, her voice, which I could dimly hear, grew louder. From inside her body, I heard almost every word she said. Within that girl, I drove to the store and back. her feet pressing the pedals of the blue car, her voice, first gate to the cold sunny mornings, rain, moonlight, snowfall, dogs. Her kidneys failed, the womb where I once lived is gone. Her young, astonished body pushed me down that long corridor, and my body hurt her, I know that. 24 years old. I'm old enough to be that girl's mother, to smooth her hair, to look into her exultant, frightened eyes, her bed sheets stained with chocolate, her heart in constant failure. It's a girl, someone must have said. She must have kissed me with her mouth. First grief, first air, and soon I was drinking her. First food, I was eating my mother, slumped in her wheelchair, one of my brothers pushing it across the snowy lawn, her eyes fixed, her face averted. Bless this body she made, my long legs, her long arms and fingers, our voice in my throat, speaking to you now. So it's just, again, I think we are probably very self-selective, right? When we, like, a poem hits us, it's like, oh, that somehow contains things I want to accomplish. I think the elegance of the jumps in time are intriguing to me on an intellectual level, but just thematically, like, this is shit that applies to my life and my mother, and and the economy of poetry, I guess, to me is the thing that blows my mind. And the fact that I don't know if this is where I'm at as a playwright, but I sometimes do get frustrated when we have to explain. And I don't think I necessarily write plays that people cannot understand at all, but I do love that about poetry, that sometimes there's a little ambiguity, or you might not understand, or this image, it gets laid out for you and you have to kind of make something of it. You have to create the space, or the meaning between those images. So I feel like I failed this assignment because this isn't what keeps me going, but it's like what keeps me centered in some way as an artist, without necessarily being able to see theater or see things, go to poetry readings. It's like bringing things in that feel, that speak to me. Yeah.
But that's exactly what I was asking about. Just how do you center yourself as an artist, whether that's moving forward or just staying centered? So it's incredible. Thank you for sharing that image and that work. I also wanted to say that Mona's play is going to be at the Public Theater, and it opens April, right, Mona? Is it your trilogy opening, the Vagrant trilogy opening?
Yeah. April 25th.
So we have to do a plug for that because it's
Please,
brilliant.
Please,
And
God, let it happen this time.
I had tickets the first time round. And so I think if you're in New York, go check it out. It's a beautiful, beautiful trilogy.
Thank you.
Maybe, Alice, would you be willing to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Playwright Center and Haley and Julia. And thank you, Lucas, for that explosion of just stimulus. It's incredible. It's like, I remember when I was a young playwright and all those ideas and all the different forms and pieces of paper and color and just there for you. And then Mona, as a sister mid-career playwright, I completely just absorb and appreciate your hewing to your language, to the language that actually speaks to you and still reverberates and resonates. I mean, I feel like that's kind of what I've been doing the past year, is just, amidst all the madness, how does language fall now, especially in a culture that is weaponizing language towards partisanship, and it's so kind of bare and raw, and there's no nuance. And so the past year, I definitely kind of committed to changing how I write, because I needed to re-explore what language meant and where I could still hear it. And I felt like I made a little discovery of, I originally got into playwriting so I could be seen and I could be heard in a way that I can't when I am a woman in a man's world, and I'm yellow in a white system. And so really my playwriting was just kind of a scream to exist and document into the world. But I've been very lucky. I've had plays in, different cities. I feel like each time I'm in a city with a play, I get to learn that city, meet that city as a character and its audience. And at some point it's like, wow, I have been seen and I've been heard in the deepest way, in a cultural way, in a spiritual way, in a geographical way. So why am I still writing and shouting? So that was kind of like the pivot that I had to make this last year. And one of the first things that really just started to like wipe the windshield clean for me was George Saunders's book. I don't know if you all know it, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. Incredible kind of refreshing of language, recalibration, even reading of of prose. And this is basically a masterclass, 7 Russian short stories, Chekhov, Turgenev, Gogol, and Tolstoy. And we, not one of the renowned stories, but just a story that you read and he kind of takes you through it. And his analysis afterwards just reminds you what it is to be human and what it is to have nuance, and that humans are contradictions. And it's 19th century Russia, so there's a lot of like trudging through snow and landscape, and but it takes its time, which is something that we had during lockdown, which is great, which kind of slows us down a little bit. But just to remember that language can like move you slowly through something, and that you have to live through discomforts. I think a lot of times when you're stuck is because you don't want to just head first go into the discomfort. You want it to be the comfort that you knew from the past, but it's not anymore. And I think that one of my strategies this year was to really just face forward and go into the discomfort. So a couple of things happened. In November, I was still kind of treading and I'm just, keeping myself open to the language. But I definitely felt the pull of doom scrolling. And I just felt like, oh, am I ever going to break out of the jail of screen language and current events? So on November 1st, I decided on November 1st, I'm making a pact with myself. And that's another thing. You have to make pacts with yourself, and then you have to enforce them and you have to do them. So on November 1st, I said, I'm putting my language first. My fresh mind is going to exist at the beginning of the day. So I am not going to pick up my device first thing when I wake up. I'm going to go to my table. I'm going to tie the curtains up so I can look out the window, and I'm going to sit, and I'm just going to write what arises from my sitting. And I do have to say, this is, since lockdown happened, I've been very lucky to be a part of St. Paul's Zen Center. Clouds and Water has a BIPOC sitting group every Wednesday that I had been going to. I had gone to Clouds and Water before live when I visited friends who took me there. And I remember one of the best things about going to the Sunday sit was to sit in a room of people in silence, like you could hear everyone breathing. And I thought, this is a miracle. This is a miracle that people can sit still together. And so I always remember that. But then when the lockdown happened, actually it went on Zoom. And so I could participate in the sit. And that sitting space in Clouds and Water just allows me to sit for 30 minutes and then have conversation that arises genuinely, and that I can deeply listen to my fellow Sangha. And it, I feel like that slowly started to seep into my writing too, so that now every morning to this day, ever since November 1st, I have been just getting up and just going to the table. And it doesn't matter if I have nothing, or it doesn't matter if I have noise and monkey grain. I go and I sit there and I just look out the window and allow my language to arise. And that just like any kind of exercise, like any flexing, has allowed me to get to a place, in my writing that feels like it might be this, the edge of something new. And so the last thing I just wanted to share was, before I'm a big fan of writing by hand, because there's something about your blood that warms the ink that goes onto the paper. And I'm a big recycling person too. I had been down in La Jolla with Lisa Dring, dramaturging her sumo play. And I forgot, it was like the first time back in kind of an institutional developmental process. And I forgot every time you rewrite something, there's like stacks of new paper. So I just like took all that paper and I decided I'm going to write on the backs of this new play in process. Just like the value, that feeling of, I'm not just recycling, I'm repurposing. I'm repurposing Lisa Dring's pages, and I'm going to be writing, on the back of it. And I realized that, as a young playwright, I wanted to take up space. I wanted to like write really flamboyantly and across the page. But I was like, oh, I do have a lot of pages. I have a lot of paper I can write on, but I need to do something different. What could be something different? And this is probably the thing that you have to try and kind of reach down and to get yourself unstuck. It's like, and then I decided, instead of trying to fill the page, I would just write really tiny. In an act of humility, I would just start, and then it doesn't have to even make sense or even be legible. I'm just writing tiny, and then it became about moment to moment scribing. And it's like I would hear, the bird sing, or a squirrel would frolic down a tree trunk. Just like everything, it's just like the act of this tiny, tiny writing. And I remember one day I was not in my space. I was at a friend's house, and there was reconstruction going on. There was like a busy street outside. There was hammering, there was sawing. And I'm like, I'm going to just tiny write my way through this. I'm just going to tiny write. And I just sat there, and it just like, and all the sounds started showing up. All the sounds, the books on his bookshelf. I just wanted to like be able to like inhabit that space, as I usually do in the mornings, but just get through the discomfort. So I actually sat and wrote for 3 hours. And here is,
Oh my gosh, that's
3
incredible. Look at that.
hours, the 3 hours of attention, which doesn't even have, it's like, it's not to be consumed. It's about the action. It's about the tiny writing that is kind of exemplified in these 2 pages. This is 3 hours of attention. And so the pages curl up, the ink is heavy and everything. But there's something about this that is now just, showing me, I mean, I have to say, it's like, this is just like, welcome to Alice Twan's madness. Like, this is like what you find in like Yayoi Kusuma, right? Like institutionalized people do this stuff. But the thought is, go ahead and swim in your madness to reach a new shore.
I love that. That's fantastic, Alice. I love that that journey of wanting to sit in the discomfort, and then these sort of 2 practical, really tangible things that came out of that, and then where that then leads you next. Is really, I did feel like I got a glimpse into your process and your mind. James, what would you like to share?
Not hard to follow up these 3 at all. Those are really excellent, everyone. For me, what inspires me is to really, really trust, and I don't always do it, of course. You got to turn off the self-doubt that's always like in my head. But I find I'm able to really access the story that I'm trying to tell when I completely trust what has popped into my head and onto my heart. And usually for all of my plays, it's based in an experience that I have lived, and so of course, I'm not writing my biography with the plays that I work on. They are, works of fiction. And so with those works of fiction, I'm obsessed with character. They're all based on me. They're all based on people that I know, but they are fully themselves, each of the characters I create. And so for them to be fully themselves, I have this 26 questions that I ask each of the characters. And it's just, I mean, I didn't come up with I came up with some of the questions, probably like 2 of them. But the rest I found in other, books or from friends. And it's just some of the basic questions like, age and gender and race. And then some of the more complex questions about, dreams and what do you really want, out of life. And when I work on those 26 questions, I find by the time that I'm done with them, I can see the character and I can hear the character. And I can also see the spaces that they belong in. So that is literally what inspires, and I need quiet. I loved looking at Lucas's boards and all that stuff. And I remember I was just at McDowell recently, and I was visiting, studios of other artists. And, you have that moment. I love how different we are as artists, but you start to question yourself. And I'm like, wait a minute, I don't have a board. And then I say, yeah, I'm not a board person, The board is not my thing, and it's fine. Trust yourself, trust your process, and it'll be fine. So yeah, that's what inspires me.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and you do create such amazing characters. I've had the pleasure of experiencing those characters. So as you can all see, there are 4 amazing writers here. Julia, would you mind just putting the link to everybody's bio? So if people want to hear more about what everyone's up to, they can read about that as well. James actually has a couple of pieces that you could listen to that are streaming right now, right? One on Audible. So there's some work that's actually happening in different forms, which is always exciting too. Great. So I want to dive in with some more questions. And I think, as you can all see, everyone's really approaching their work from really different angles, which is to me always exciting. I'm curious for each of you, and whoever wants to take this question, please go for it. Where do you start, right? Do you think, and I know it might be different from project to project, do you start with a character, James? When you're talking about character so much in your work, is that something you would start with? Do people start with story? Do people start with image? Where do you gravitate when you're starting out? And maybe James, if you could take it first, since you were talking a lot about character.
Yeah, you know what? I'm actually in rehearsal. I'm supposed to be at rehearsal right now, but I'll get back there. Don't worry. Before I start with character, I usually find myself being, I want to say haunted, even though it sounds crazy, haunted by an experience. And it just not, so even the play that I'm working on right now, I really did not want to write this play. Haley, you're familiar with it. It's called The Drop Off. And it's based on, back in 2014, my family had to put my aunt in an assisted living facility. And it was hard enough, like going through that experience. So I definitely did not want to write about it. But I was having like sleepless nights where I could not stop thinking about it. And then I started seeing the character and the space because I had been in the space. And so after a few nights of refusing to write about it, it wasn't going to get out of my head. I wasn't going to be able to sleep until I just got up and started working on it. And so I'd be getting up at 1 a.m. and typing and doing those 26 questions and getting to hear the voices of the characters. And so it's usually an experience for me first,
Mm.
and then I'll take it from there.
Mm.
And also trusting that experience, because I was like, who wants to watch, someone put a loved one in an assisted living facility. But because I trusted it and didn't worry about so much who wants to watch it, because I just trusted it, it's a play that has like afforded me so many beautiful, opportunities. And like I said, I'll be back in rehearsal today. So just trusting.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I know James, you're going to be leaving a little early, so we'll miss you for part of this conversation, but I'm glad you'll be able to be here for the first part anyway.
Glad to be here.
What about for you, Mona?
It's different things I think that get me started.
Mhm.
And I think, for it's funny you spoke of that, James, because the play that I worked with Haley on was written to get me through or to try to understand like this protracted illness of my that my mom had. Um, and at the same time, it happened. My mother's illness was happening at the same time that I was like broke. So I was like, I started to I didn't, I wish I had the answer to like where they start, like what is it, sourdough starter? Like what is the sourdough starter that you have,
Uh-huh.
you know? Um, in the case of that play, which was a very strange play and written in a very different way than others, I really was like, what are the myths that my mom told herself, uh, being this West Coast Californian? What are the myths I told myself? Um, why do we talk about certain things but we don't actually really talk about money, like
Mm,
in the lack of money at times? And so sometimes it's that,
mm,
um and sometimes it's place. It's
mhm,
like uh the trilogy that I have started with me asking questions about my father's country, Lebanon, and asking questions about why it was that his village was synonymous with a camp where Palestinians had been living since 1948. And I started to just want to understand. And then I did a lot of research because my dad wasn't exactly a historian, and nor did he really care to elucidate his, to him, it's like that's in the rearview mirror. But then what ended up that part of the trilogy where they're in the refugee camp was something my beloved uncle told me once about how he was comparing the Middle East to the book Who Moved My Cheese. And I was like, oh, motherfucker, I got to fucking record this shit in my head. And this has got to go in the play. Because he's like, literally, that is the explanation. So it's like this mix of things.
mhm,
Um, some true-ish, borrowed from life. And then, like you said, James, characters that um, seep in. And sometimes I wonder if the difference in styles, you guys, this is literally nothing to do with what we're talking about, but now that we're having all these playwrights in the room, is partly the difference in styles, like if it were a film, like how close in you are to the character, the face.
mhm,
Ultra realism is like we're right here. And then sometimes it's like, no, I've observed that person from across the street. You're gonna see them, but you're gonna see my sketch of that person. It is not, I'm not promising you actually a full-bodied person here. This is it's I miss this. Like even this conversation that we're having, I think is something that um, I live in New York, but I have not had this kind of conversation in a while. And I think that I'm just inspired by all the things all of you guys have been saying. And um, Alice, what you said too about like what what is it to sort of take a fresh look at language now and to sort of take a breath and receive is what I was taking from what you were saying, to sort of sit there and go, I'm just going to receive for a bit. Because we are living in very reptilian brain kind of times, if that's a way of saying it, you know? And you wake up and you're like, ah, you know, and it's like, that's okay. Sometimes you got to write through that. But the practice of it, there is a practice to it. I think probably I'm not going too out on a limb if I say we're all usually mentally better when we actually do it. Like somebody said that once to me, it's the most obvious thing, but they're like, you're generally better when you're writing. So try to find a way.
Yeah.
So that's so the other thing I will say is that I do really love to work with actors, and went so far as to do the most ridiculous thing in the world, which is forming a theater company in New York a few years ago. We did do a play on Zoom, but with that, I did for a while do a lot of improvisation. I was like a failed comedy person, and I love having improvisations that I lead as the writer, but the actors can just go where they want. And I love getting like work from that. And I'm really transparent about the fact that I'm gonna get stuff from it. And so I guess you'd say that kind of joint stock, it's like a joint stock-ish way. I get very, very fed by that. I love hearing people talk about things that are angering them, things that they're obsessed with, the thing that you can't go to bed at night without, you know, and sometimes it's the most specific, ridiculous thing, but like it's the tilt-a-whirl ride that you rode at that carnival that time, and you can't forget it. You know, it's like those things that inhabit our psychic spaces, um, or other people's psychic spaces that I love to sort of pull at those threads. So, wow, I don't do not want to see a transcription of what I just said, but
I think
it's
that it's great because you started with the sourdough. I felt like you started with the sourdough in terms of the questions, and then you got to the place and you're kind of like rolling out the dough, and then you brought in these other ingredients with the collaborators, and so I felt yeah, it was really exciting to hear. Just knowing your work so well, it makes so much sense. Like because I've seen those aspects of the process, um, and in each thing you were talking about, there's a lot of questions, and I've definitely felt that in the room, like leading with those questions. And place is so important to your work. It just seems so obvious that you say it, but yeah, it's really great to hear. What about for you, Lucas? Where do you generally start? And I know maybe you could also talk a little about your process at the Playwright Center, because you've been working in some different ways there as well.
Yeah, because I think, we're overrun as playwrights sometimes with this workshop model, and I can get really boiled down by it. It can be kind of uninspiring and feel like we're just participating in like this rote mechanic that isn't actually lending itself to like the creative spirit of work. So yeah, I mean, specifically at the Playwright Center last fall, I just pitched doing these design laboratories with different designers in the Twin Cities area, but also beyond Twin Cities. And just like sitting with a sound designer, giving them like 20 pages and then being like, for 2 hours, we're going to mess around and like come away with something. And it may feel like super peripheral. It may feel like some sideways entry point. But I find designers to be like really dramaturgically beneficial. I feel like it's weird the way, just in the American theater system, how we're siloed into our very specific like roles as theater artists, and there's so many boundaries around who gets to talk to who when. So I've just been really moved to like involve people who are thinking sonically, people who are thinking about world building from a really, really early point in the process. Speaking to your question though, Haley, like what gets me started? I mean, just like James and Mona said, like a play can arrive in so many different ways. Like, you wake up at 2 a.m. and you have to like text yourself so you remember the next morning what you were thinking, and then at 8 a.m. you read your text and it like makes no sense. But sometimes that kernel can lead to a play. I mean, I think however the play arrives, the way I find myself enacting it, like through the idea of like a play, whatever a play is more often than not through like image, like images and objects. I'm always wondering about like what is the thing I'd be really excited to see staged, and how is that like a convergence of elements. And when I say that, I mean, like, I'm thinking about how time and existence is completely anachronistic all the time. Like, there's no logic to our life anymore. And the way I find that represented in my stage plays, at least, is like, okay, what are the most disparate materials I can collect in like one composite? And like, what is the emotional impact of that? Like a queer couple in a pharmacy at midnight giving birth to a cinder block. What is that? Like a woman who is doing borderline sex work by dressing up as Freddy Krueger to appease some weird like fetish that a trucker has. I don't know. And like, then how is that about borders and surveillance? I don't know. It's my job to create like the connective tissue between like some strange gangly thing on stage, and then build query around it. I think like that like problem solving aspect of writing a play is what excites me the most. Yeah, that's what I got.
That's interesting. I just have kind of a follow-up question on that, Lucas.
Mhm.
Do you come up with the image? Like, does the image happen first and then you analyze the image, or does the image is the image birthed from a concept? Does it make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it could be either one. It could literally
Mhm.
be like, what material am I around often? Like, the way cinder blocks arrived for me is like I was thinking of writing a play about gentrification in East LA, and I was thinking about when my mom and I would visit there because she grew up in Boyle Heights. She would just send me and my cousins and my brothers to play in like the industrial zone, like of the neighborhood, and we would just be like screwing around with like shipping containers and blocks. So like this kind of like weird, very hyper personal object attachment to a place or an idea, then becomes an entry point. But then I've also had the inverse happen. Like another play was birthed from in 2017, the CIA released the Abbottabad compound data drive, which was where Al Qaeda was housed. And like looking through that release, you're culling through this archive of documents and JPEGs and whatever. And I'm just finding like Looney Tunes dubbed in Arabic. And I'm so moved by like the idea of someone just sitting in this space, like going through memes and like watching shitty romantic comedies. But like there's such a dense, dark space around them as well. So I don't know, things can arrive any way.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Very evocative images. Alice, I'm gonna turn it over to you. Where do you find yourself starting these days?
I just don't know anymore, Haley.
That's a great answer too,
Well, I do have to say, everybody who's written a play before COVID is really lucky, because now you have something that automatically is going to track differently because our world has shifted. So congratulations. I find that, the more I write, the more it's just listening to voices. I don't even write character names anymore. I'm just like writing lines of dialogue. Just it's almost like liberating yourself back into a creativity, And so I mean, before it's like it's so much about prompts. Like I wrote a whole play based on Ikebana flower arrangements, about a Chinese family but with this Japanese form to test the Asian glob. It's like, it all looks the same in America, but Chinese and Japanese are definitely different, and then looking at the arrangement and the relation of the flower to the wood, to the moss, just stuff like that. But now recently with the tiny writing situation, just, I've been kind of, I always think it's interesting if writers or even non-writers kind of explore their idiolect, which is that place in your brain that all the languages that you know and speak and understand live. So, I mean, even like if you look at the English language, like we have so many like rule breakages, horrible spellings. We have something called do support, which I didn't even know until became an ESL teacher, which is for questions and negatives, you have to use do. It's like, do you know where you're going? Or I don't know. That's why, when immigrants are speaking, it's like where you go or I know, like there's no do support. And do support is the marker of civility, or education or something, Or even like in our language, we have count and non-count nouns, nouns that you count, 1, 2, 3, 4, $5, how many, and then non-count nouns, money, how much. You don't count money, you count because it's so along those lines, I also speak a little Chinese, and I noticed that I'm a big receptor of puns, because in Chinese, one sound could be 8 different words, but they're all the same sound. So I decided, after I do my initial tiny writing sitting, I've been prompting myself with homonyms. So I'll just like, herd, like past tense of hear, and a group of sheep, herd. Like that will be my prompt. And then I'll just go ahead and write a scene. And there's not even any, it's just basically 2 voices. And another thing that I've been very, very interested in is Leo Tolstoy's quote, which is, the best stories are not good versus evil. They are good versus good. So I'm just trying to kind of find what's the drama if like both sides are good. It's just that they're on the different sides of a contradiction. So like today, and then I also do it across languages. So yo, like I in Spanish, and yo, which is have in Chinese. So I'll yo and yo. I'll write a whole scene on I and have, but in those 2 different, not those 2 different languages. It's just like, a seed planted, a concept. And today's was like castor, like the wheels on the bottom of a chair, and castor, which is beaver in Spanish. So I wrote a whole. So, it's like, that's where I am now, because it's right now, it's about liberation of the imagination. Like whatever formed you pre-COVID and the language, and even Lucas, as you were saying about the developmental system and institution, it's just like, that is just this weird grid market-oriented thing. But what is your pure language and your pure playwriting? What are you really getting at? Like to dig deeper into where you are, but then at the same time, at the surface, have fun.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love those prompts. Kind of getting back to that concept of prompts, but really focusing on the language. There, Alice. That's really makes me wish that I knew many, many languages. So, my next question is sort of, you guys are all so great at being in these creative spaces, but do you ever get stuck? Do you ever get stuck in your own writing or get stuck with a play? And, what has helped you move forward, or what have you done in those moments? Yes, Alice.
I'll just go really quick. I'm super stuck right now, and that's probably why I'm doing all this creativity liberation. But I did start a play before COVID, about 2 sisters. One is a free spirit and one is a control freak. And I love that. And I kind of know the play, but now that, that kind of all this shifting is happening, I realized to solve the play is not about solving plot or character or language. It really is like my shifting of being into this new way of writing is going to allow me to have a new look at it.
That's great. Lucas, it sounded like you had something to.
Yeah. I mean, I'm constantly stuck. I mean, to sit here and pretend like writing a play is easy is just kind of an evil task. But it's not. And I think a lot of, what's been birthed from that is like really engaging with like trickery. Like how I read this book that I started to read in grad school, but then I just stopped because you don't read what people assign you in grad school. But anyways, I picked it up. It's called Trickster Makes This World by Lewis Hyde. And it's this kind of critical engagement with like the trickster in different cultural mythologies across time. So whether that's like, you know, the coyote, Alegba, the crow, et cetera, et cetera. And Hyde like kind of outlines like that the trickster exists on this threshold between worlds, right? And that kind of nimbleness generates an appetite, and the appetite creates invention. So really like harnessing like trickster, like I have to fool myself into writing all the time, whether that's like lighting the same incense over and over again, sitting in the same spot, playing the same music. That's like one appendage of it, I think. The other part, I think something I mentioned earlier when I was talking about my document that I showed at the beginning of this talk, is really like implicating other people, like creating urgency around the work you're making so that like it's about other people. And I think that's so like wedded to the idea of playwriting as a literary form that's maybe divorced from other genres of writing. You know, like making a dedication in your manuscript, I find like a really like helpful engine. Oh, a question I have for the other writers in this room, because I've heard so many opinions about it, but I find like talking about a play before you've even written it really helpful. Just like forcing yourself to like name the things you're trying to write about will eventually like conjure that language on the page. But I know some people are very like cagey about not wanting to show their work so early in process. But honestly, like following any that you have, like without judgment. Like right now I'm writing a play about mortuaries, and like that feels pretty morbid and cruel, but I think in a time where like death is everywhere, like you have to be investigative. Like that's the only thing that's going to keep you sane. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great. I love the trickster mythology, and it sounds like they're not just like tricks, they're actually like very practical techniques that help kind of put you back in the same mindset that you were beforehand.
One other thing I forgot to say is I have this box. I don't know if any of you know Oblique Strategies by Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt, but it's like a set of cards that Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt developed when they were having like creative block as musicians. And it was introduced to me like early, like in undergrad, but like it just says like sometimes inane things, but you just draw a card and it's like, what does this one say? In total darkness or
A very large room, very quietly.
yeah, yeah. Or like some say like water, you know, like very simple instructions. And I find like forcing yourself to like, I don't know, exist in this place of parameter actually yields a lot of creative energy. Kind of like your homonym exercise, Alice. I like wrote that down. I find that really exciting. I'll probably use that with my students next week. Cool.
James, I know you have to head to rehearsal soon, so maybe you could just let us know a little bit about what you do when you're stuck, and then you can run off to rehearsal and not be stuck.
Yeah. You know what? I'm also stuck since we're having like stuck confessions right now. I'm working on a new piece. I'm so stuck, and I am a part of a group where I have to bring new pages. And the last time we had a meeting last Wednesday, and I just didn't have new pages. And so I just wanted to talk about what I am working on. And so to answer Lucas's question, it's so helpful for me when I can just like talk out an idea, and also being vulnerable enough to admit that the idea scares me, to admit that I don't know where I am going, you know, or just that I'm having questions and doubting why I wanted to write the play in the first place. And so I find like, you know, and it's so hard and you have to be ready. So I'm not always ready to have those conversations, but when I am ready to have them, I find it's so helpful. And then by the end of the conversation, I'm running back to a notepad or to this laptop to keep going. So yeah, that's one thing. I love having conversations with people whenever I'm stuck. And then I also just love getting out of my house and doing something simple to like, you know, instead of sitting around obsessing and beating up myself, going for just like a walk, literally just going for a walk and taking a route that's different. You know, I can't always take the same route because I get bored very easily. That's one of my problems as a playwright also, is that I will tend to get bored with a piece. But I feel like when I do get bored, I'm running from something.
Hmm.
I'm running from something that I need to face. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. That's really great advice. Well, have a fantastic rehearsal, and we'll talk
Thank you.
soon, James. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you all. So great seeing you all. See you soon.
Thanks. Mona, I'm wondering about you. If you ever get stuck and when that happens, what do you do?
I feel very stuck now. I don't know what I was saying to someone recently. I'm like, I don't know what it would take for me to just initiate a play on my own and want to write it. And the other side of that is I'm really grateful because I have some plays that have been around for a bit that now are going up. Um, but that impulse, it's a little bit talking about what you've been talking about, Alice. Like what's there, you know, behind door number 3 that I'm not like. I feel like I had a better sense. I don't know, a few years ago, pre-pandemic, of like what it was I was the most afraid of, what it was that I was the most embarrassed about. It's almost very like what are those things in elementary school back in my day, slam books, you know, it's like, what's that thing? Very just simplistic notions that might get me started. Um, and I'm a little bit, I mean, I have things I'm really proud of that I'm working on right now, but I haven't felt that uncluttered and like very kind of open feeling in a while. One of the great things about the Lark, may the Lark live forever in our brains, was that they had a thing called Playground where you would just show up on whatever night it was, and there would be playwrights and directors. And particularly a few years back when I'd first done it, like I remember Ray Pamatmat was working on a play that had 12 characters. So playwrights would get up and read them. But the thing was, the director would just direct it right on the spot. So there was it wasn't like, let's all sit, and Liz Lerman's great, but it was just like, let's just do this and let's just see what it is. And if you like instant gratification, which many of us do, it was like, oh, I get to hear it and see it. But it also just gave you a vocabulary, and you could see how someone received your work. And also, I mean, when I have taught, and I don't teach very much, but I will tell people to try to do um, perhaps something that someone else mentioned, but like make a date with people, read it out loud. Try not to like, I think the whole thing of the first rough, messy draft or the first rough pages like is 100% true. So don't try to interrogate it too heavily, um, but make that date and read it out loud. And because it's probably, you might think it's really shitty, and it might be, but you get together with people and you hear it and go, oh my God, there's actually some threads in there I want to pull. And that is what I think is really, for me anyway, I miss that so terribly right now. To and obviously we've been in this time of all of us, right? We're all in these different, I don't know if Playwright Center meets in person, but you know, we're all dealing with that in one way or another. Um, as far as plays getting stuck, not getting stuck, like I asked Ken Presidency about this, who I'd met at New Dramatists. And if people don't know Ken, he's just a master playwright and a playwriting teacher. So I was like, what do you do? I said, I just have this like Protestant work ethic of like, you fucking finish, just fucking finish everything. And he goes, no, sometimes you don't. And he goes, and if you want to, you'll learn from them, the ones you don't finish. But he's like, if you want, you go and find, say, Chekhov or somebody, and you find all the things they wrote that kind of didn't quite make it to the thing. And you go, oh, I see. That's what he was working out. that actually he figured out by the time he got to Three Sisters. And so there's a part of me that still feels like just finish it because you don't know. But that can take a lot of energy. And if you really feel like you're out of gas, I would actually be very curious what everybody else says about this too. Like, have you had 40 pages of something and said, I'm not finishing this now? Because I have something like that. So how do you get unstuck? I guess you make dates with people. This is for me, I'm more extroverted than probably a lot of playwrights. You make dates with people. You try to be accountable to something. You have someone like Haley Finn and you say, Haley, can I send you a draft of something in like 9 months? And you're like, shit, I told Haley I'd send her something in 9 months. And there you are, like 1 week before it doing it. But no, I mean, to me, it's, we do need that sometimes. We need brethren to say to us, how's that going? You know, but you can also slash and burn. If you're really stuck, you can be like, I'm going to cut every third line and just see what happens. I mean, there's so many tricks you can play on yourself, I think, too. The other thing I did, the first play I ever wrote was like I guess it was a play, but it was like, I wrote it for myself to perform. And the way that I got through it was pretending it wasn't me. I was like, I'm just going to pretend I'm writing this for somebody else. So I'm not going to worry about the performative. I'm not going to worry if I can do it. I'm just going to write it, and I think that can help too. Yeah.
Can I just answer your question, Mona, about finishing or not finishing?
Yeah, please.
I feel like it's really important to get to the end, no matter how bad it is, because then you will have finished this round and then you could move on. I think that it's really important just to, even like, I think the gallop to the end, as embarrassing as it is really useful so that you can, but in your speaking, I feel like there's a couple of things about the unstuckness, in that one thing is really helpful is the original impulse. Like, why are you right? Why did you start this play in the beginning? We first talked about what do you do to start, but now in the middle of it, you really have to go back to what was that event, image, sound, slap, whatever that was, to really go back to that. And then what you were saying, Mona, reminded me of the radical edit. Go ahead and just only keep the stuff that you like, or slash out all the crap you think it is, and then see what you miss.
This is great, really great. So we're moving on to our questions section, and it seems like we already have some questions coming in. So it feels like everyone is very eager to hear what you have to say. So here's our first question. We'd love to hear more about how you juggle projects at different stages of development in the work. How do you flip between them in your brain and your heart and your attention? You've got multiple things going on. How do you handle that? Who wants to take that?
Can you repeat it one more time? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. Let's say you have multiple projects that you're working on at the same time, some in development, some earlier stages. How do you juggle multiple projects simultaneously? Or do you juggle it? I guess should be another question. Not everyone does juggle multiple projects.
I would say that kind of mood board, Lucas, that you presented, or I'm calling it a mood board. If you have one of those, and if you have to do a few projects at once, which most of us do, you can slot those up. It can be like, okay, it's time for 1960s Singapore. That's where I'm living now, right? Or, oh no, it's time for the granary in France. I mean, I think that you have no choice, but sometimes you have to do more than one. So music, going back to what you presented to, Lucas, which is like, what's the soundtrack for the piece? I think it's going to be really interesting to see how we all work as the pandemic continues and sputters and stops and continues, because I know we're all talking about it, I think, but our brain capacities are like, I am working on multiple things, and I feel it's tough. It's tougher than it used to be. Because the other way to do it is you go, well, I'm going to go to this coffee house to work on this, and then I'm going to go sit in that crappy desk in my apartment there for that one. You can put yourself in different places, I think. We hope.
That's so interesting. That goes back to location, which seems to be a really important part of your process and thinking, Mona. Um, Lucas, do you have something that you want to add to that, or should we move to our next question?
I mean, the only thing I would say is I have a really difficult time working on multiple projects if they're at the same point in development. Like if I'm working on like two projects that are both really generative, like they'll just bleed into each other and become the same project. Whereas if like I'm in like an editing stage or a rewrite stage versus something that is like a brand new seed of something, I think it's easier for me to compartmentalize.
Hmm.
But you know, that's a luxury to like be able to have that kind of compartmentalization, because we need, you know, we need to be working all the time. You know, this country doesn't reward artists, so of course we're trying to take as many opportunities as we can, and often that means working on a bunch of projects at the same time. Yeah, that's kind of a non-answer maybe.
No, it's an answer for sure. We have another question coming in. This is actually about later in the process. So, do you ever revise work that you wrote years ago? You know, even plays that have been produced. There's of course the famous story about Tony Kushner, who has been done a lot of revisions on Angels in America over the years. Just curious for the three of you, have you gone back to older plays?
Yeah, I'm doing that now for the trilogy. I think that it it's not vastly different, but there's a new beginning. I, I think um, nobody wants to see every single fucking play have a reference to this pandemic, but I think we are through this. We are in this, and so what does that do to the work that you've created? Um, I'm curious. I'm going to throw this back out to the group. So yes, I have, and yes, I'm doing that now. And it's what's great about it is sometimes that thing you thought you could never lose, you're just like, goodbye. I see you now for who you are. Go away. Cut, cut, cut. But I'd love to ask the two of you guys, do you have a play that you're just like, I wrote that under certain conditions, the craziness that was my life in a certain point of time, and I cannot go back in that. It just has to live the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I'm kind of with you, Alice, that it's good, it's healthy to just like purge yourself and finish the thing. But I have a lot of those finished things that like sit in a hole in my wall that I never want to look at again. Um, you know, I'm thinking of one play in particular that was like about a really traumatic relationship in my life and moment in my life. And like, I think like maybe it was healthy for me spiritually to write that thing down, but maybe the whole world doesn't need to see that. Something that does end up happening though, instead of like rewriting, I'll steal from like old drafts often of like projects that feel like a little dead end. Like if there's an image or a character or like even just like a 3-line exchange that I really, you know, loved, I'll just put it in a new context and like use it in a new play. I actually find that super helpful.
Someone mentioned Ajax in the chat, and Ajax was kind of just a trance channeling. Like, I don't even know if that's playwriting. Like, that was just like, and it kind of came out, it just kind of came out completely. Um, I don't know, it really is about, it's so important to just really, if that initial impulse that got you to even write the play, like, I guess it depends on your life if you want to go back and explore that. Because I find that every play I write, I'm trying to resolve some big contradiction inside of myself. And some contradictions, you know, you just don't want to deal with until a later date or maybe never. But there it is.
That's great. Another question here is about the rewriting process. What is the most exciting rewrite process you've ever gone through, and what can make rewriting exciting? Can we garner any excitement and inspiration around the rewrite?
I find the best rewriting is to have your company of actors there. Like when your play is in that place where it needs it's just like not coming together, and then you hear it with your company of actors. This was a process I had at Ojai, so it was over 10 days. So you get to hear it, and then, you know, there are days you don't have to, and I think Sundance does that too. You don't have to go into the rehearsal, you could just keep writing, and then I feel like that is like 3-dimensional writing, like not in your head, but out into the world. And I just remember that one, I tend to like, the exciting part is when you hook into a soundtrack. And for that one, this is Cox Crow, which was basically a riff off of Glengarry Glen Ross, except it's Americans trying to do business in Shanghai, but not understanding how Chinese government works. So, and then they themselves are trying to figure out if they're, you know, they don't know who to trust is basically it. So there, I just kind of hooked into Miles Davis's Quiet Nights. And there's something about that soundtrack that I listened literally like for 6 hours in a row at the Ojai Coffee Roasters, and just like banged out the second act. I don't know how, it was just like all the input from the actors, like you, Mona, it just like, hear it, the actors are going, what the hell, why, you get all that, and then you just go to a place and you just hook into a soundtrack, and then you just, you know, pump coffee for 6 hours, and just, it's one of those things you almost have to like, just like build into your trance. I think that was probably the most exciting. And then after you get it done, you collapse.
I love that. I was going to you reminded me of something, Alice, when you were talking about that, the taking in of stuff from actors and going away. I think one of the harder things is I felt like that, you know, I wanted to please people and be a good student and check things off. And I don't think that's a great way to do a rewrite, because it's just not, I think it's good to put those notes away that you get. If you have the time, put those notes away a little bit. I don't necessarily mean the ones that you get from actors, but like the institutional notes. Sometimes it's good to just put it away. You look at it again and go, oh shit, they had a point. But I was just thinking of, I had the pleasure to work with this actress, Dee Dee O'Connell, and I remember watching her in rehearsal, and it was so interesting. My experience of it was that she was like, I'm working on this one thing today. You ain't gonna get the whole thing. I'm working on this one piece of it, this particular physicality. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. If we thought of a play as like a painting canvas, sometimes you get notes and you're like, I gotta fix it all. And it's like, no, just do the chiaroscuro or whatever it's called. Like, just right now, all I'm doing is this.
Mm.
So I think you can, again, it's tricking yourself, but it's like picking one thing. And I think the danger with some developmental situations is that, again, you feel like you have to do everything at once. And how do we, part of being an artist is controlling your time, figuring out how to allocate your time. If you spend 45 hours on page one, no time on the rest of it, that's probably not great. So it's like, how do you know, well, sometimes I'll go, just read that last page, just read it, don't do anything, look at something else, and then go back to it and put the timer on for 15 minutes. You only get 15 minutes to do anything. It's all just like tricks. I think I need them now, by the way. Please feel free to send me them, because I feel like I'm a little bit out of them. Yeah.
Those are great. Let's move on.
I'm sorry, I have one more rewrite experience. When I was talking about the actors, it reminded me at the Playwright Center, when you have a reading and then 2 days before the next reading, and that first reading with the audience. So it's one thing to have actors and actor input, but to try out a draft with an audience, especially the Twin City audiences are such good theater goers, like you can get a good read. I mean, of all the cities, it's like pretty good read of audience reaction. And then you have a couple days to go and work on it and rewrite. Like that is a very juicy rewrite situation. And
Mm.
then the second reading can incorporate all that you learned from the first, because the audience is the last character, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like many of you are inspired by bringing in either other collaborators, be it actors or the audience, to help kind of add more juice and also a little more focus potentially to the rewrite lens. Okay, we have another question. This is probably going to be our last question for tonight. I find myself getting stuck at the point of a story. I can outline and write the climax, act break, but then struggle to track the fallout or move to a conclusion. How do you maneuver your characters past that point? So this is a little bit of like, if you're stuck in the middle of your play, what do you do? And maybe it also relates to another question that I had of like, what's your roadmap? Like, are there ways that you can figure out navigating if you're stuck in the middle? Or maybe we could take it to the idea of like, when you're writing your play, what is the roadmap that you use to get to your first draft? Like, how do you I know some writers outline, some writers have a really clear sense of story, some are really following impulse. What is your process in navigating through the play?
I'll just throw out that I tend to be more an intuitive impulse person. So what kind of excites me in a scene, I kind of don't do a roadmap, because that gives me less chance for discovery. I love playwriting for things to discover and to be surprised by. So there's a lot of sleeping involved, which means you have your scene and you're in it and you think what can happen, what needs to happen next. Like it just kind of like just kind of juggling, like what is the thing, what are the stakes, I mean, this is if you don't do a map and you just need to kind of feel your way. Sometimes there's a roadmap plot wise, event wise, but sometimes there's a roadmap emotionally. What's the emotional journey you want to go on? And I feel like a lot of times when you think too hard directly on it, it's not going to happen. It's when you're taking a shower, it's when you're riding your bike, it's when you take a walk, it's when you're exercising. When you're not thinking directly on it, the answer will creep up.
Yeah, that goes back to what James was saying too. Doing something simple. Mona, it looks like you're maybe have something to say.
No, I mean, I think it's such a great question, because that's literally, I'm having that problem myself with a play. So I would love to know. I mean, I was just going to say, I think it can be, I'm going to say something that I don't do, but I know people do, which is, and I'm not saying I don't do that, I just haven't, is it's like, what's the question of the play, right? And that classic thing of like, by page 10, what have you made us think we might see? Guys, please feel free to jump in, because I did not study structure, right? But Ken Preston-Inzi, I always bring him up in any kind of thing like this. He said to me once, I said, do you have to do that thing? He goes, no, but you have to let them know they're not going to see it eventually. Right? It's like, and so, and then that goes back to what was the initial impulse. I don't know who asked, I think it was an anonymous question, but what was the initial impulse? Was it, I want to spend time with this character, which is fine? Was it, oh man, I saw this couple fighting in a laundromat and I was horrified? Sometimes it's helpful to go back, like, what was that? And did that moment contain how much did that moment contain in it? But if you're really stuck, you can just do the kind of things that you would do in an improv group. It's like, here's this couple. Let's do a scene 5 years from now. Let's do a scene. I mean, again, it's tricks. Do a scene 10 years from now. I knew a playwright who would call things studies the way that painters call things studies. And so it's again another trick, right? Because you're like, well, it's not going to end up in the play. I'm just going to write this scene where the father has told the son everything he never would tell him. I'm just going to write it. And I think you can do those things because it does let the unconscious speak into the process. And then you share it with a trusted colleague or whatever later. And they may be like, oh, there's something in that. So
That's great. Lucas, what did you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, kind of in line with what Mona's saying, like I think discovering what the pivot can be and how you can break your pattern is helpful. I'm not one for outlines either, really. Like as much as I have all this crap on my wall, like it's ambient. And I remember once a mentor, like I don't write chronologically. I never write chronologically, like in a play. I'm always writing in scraps and then like stringing it together. But one time an instructor was like, I want you to write this play chronologically. You have to do that. That's your task. You're writing a beginning, middle, and end. And I was pissy about it and I resented that instruction, but then I did it and I wrote a play and it felt like vastly different than other kinds of plays I'd written before. So I think maybe like identifying like a pattern that you sit in that's comfortable and then not doing that is maybe like a good solution. I also, I hear about like, in playwriting pedagogy, people are like, write the worst play you can write, or write the play that you're most scared of. I think the kind of grand instruction I like right now is write the thing that will embarrass you the most. I'm feeling pretty like socially embarrassed all the time, like because I lack that fluency right now because we're dealing with less and less people. And I just think it's kind of funny to like deface your ego a bit when you're writing. So maybe embarrass yourself is my advice to this person.
Yes, I feel like that's such good advice. I love the idea of the study or the sketch that is just an exercise that's not going in the big painting. It's just there to flex your muscle, to try it out, and then also the embarrassing thing. But I have to say, at the beginning of our conversation, I said about discomfort. It's like, if you're agonizing, go ahead and agonize, like feel that agony. I can't, stress more that on November 1st, that day that I did not pick up my device, it took me 30 minutes to resist my device and get to the chair. But once I got to the chair, it's a step forward. Like, go ahead and agonize, just agonize to the end, just fully agonize and let it be. Like do that and then get that out and then move on. And then on the other side of agony, also have fun. Also have fun with a little sketch. And I'm going to put in the chat this exercise that I got from the George Saunders book: a cell phone, a pair of gloves, and a fawn leaf chat in a wheelbarrow on a suburban driveway. Like that, just just go ahead and remember, a play is play. You have to remember, that's Peter Brook, Empty Space, last line. A play is play. So go ahead and agonize, feel that. Don't get down on yourself. Just let yourself do it, but then also play. Remember to play.
I think that's so important and such great advice as we sort of wrap up for today. I thank you so much for everything that all of you have shared. I love the sitting in the discomfort. I love the agony, but I also love the play and remembering that as well. I love the tricking and the inspiration and the images and the image boards and the silence and the tiny writing. These are all the images that are still in my mind as as I've been listening today. So thank you for sharing. Thank you all for being here and being part of this conversation. I hope you'll join us for other conversations and readings at the Playwright Center. Please check out our upcoming events at pwcenter.org. And thank you so much, Alice, Lucas, Mona, coming from all parts of the country this evening. It's so good to see you all and hope to see you soon. So
Thanks,
thank you.
Haley. Thanks, Julia. Thanks, Mona and Lucas. Great to meet
Yeah.
you.
To meet
Thank you guys so
See you
much.
again, hopefully live.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Wonderfully inspiring conversation.
Thank you, audience. Go right.
Go right.
Bye.